I see more people joining, so let's get started. This webinar is hosted by Inside Assurance together with our trusted partners, Vanta and Mirai Security. Our goal today is to leave you with practical insights, actionable steps, and a better understanding of how to get audit ready for CMMC 2.0 without unnecessary delays, costs, or confusion. You'll hear from speakers across auditing, automation, and consulting. So whether you're just starting out or already in the thick of compliance prep, there's something here for you. Let's quickly introduce today's speakers. We have Adam Glover, who is our Director of Audit Services here at Inside Assurance. Adam, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Adam Glover, as you said, I'm a director here. I have almost 20 years of experience in IT audit and security compliance, and I'm the lead for both CMMC and High Trust here at Inside Assurance. And let's see, I've been working with CMMC since 2016, so it's been a long journey to get here. So excited for the discussion today.
Awesome, that is exciting. Next, we have Faisal Khan, GRC Solutions Specialist at Vanta. Faisal, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Everyone, my name is Faisal Khan. I'm a GRC Solutions Specialist at Vanta. Vanta, we're a trust management product. We help with all things GRC and trust related, and that includes a lot of compliance related activities. I help our customers with questions on all things GRC. That includes framework adoption, where CMMC comes up quite a lot these days. My decade plus experience not only includes building my own security and compliance programs in the past, but also being on the other side, consulting on the same for organizations. Really excited to be chatting with you all today about CMMC and looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Faisal. And next we'll be introducing Sandy Buchanan, who is the Managing Director at Mirai Security. Sandy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ro. So I'm Sandy Buchanan. I'm one of the managing directors with Mirai Security. We're a full stack cybersecurity consultancy. So everything from the GRC side of things right here to all the technical nitty gritty of building a security program. I've got a background in safety and security engineering, so helping organizations build security programs for highly critical applications, organizations like Pratt & Whitney, General Motors, and whatnot, to make sure that their stuff doesn't, kill people for the most part.
Well, that's good. We don't want anybody killing anybody, especially because some security feature is wrong.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a quick look at what we'll be covering today. We'll first discuss what is CMMC and why it matters, the business case for CMMC, how to approach CMMC compliance, strategies to reduce cost and scope, common challenges and how to avoid them, and how to future-proof and have your strategic priorities. After that, we'll talk about the key takeaways and we'll open then the Q&A session. We'll also be running a few polls during the session, so keep an eye out on those. And again, if you have any questions, please drop them on the chat right here to your right. With that, let's jump into it. Adam, over to you.
Great, thanks. All right, so first thing, let's talk a little bit about what is CMMC and why does it matter. So CMMC has been around for a long time. It's gone through many different iterations and many different phases throughout its career. So when it first started, as I mentioned, back in 2016, 2017, it started as a DFARS clause that referenced NIST 800-171. Then during the first Trump administration, it became CMMC 1.0. Then during the Biden administration, it became CMMC 2.0. And that's what we know today as CMMC. So when people talk about CMMC, it's actually the second iteration. And there are 3 levels of CMMC 2.0, where the original CMMC 1.0 actually had 5 levels. So it was a little bit more complex. And the original one, I would say, was a true maturity model, where this one really isn't, even though it still carries that name and that same acronym. So what was CMMC designed to do? It was designed to protect a classification of data that the government calls controlled unclassified information, or CUI is how you'll commonly hear it referred to. This goes all the way back to an executive order that was issued by George W. Bush and then subsequently the Obama administration as well. So this has been around for quite some time. And as you can see, just kind of based on my timeline and the history I've outlined, it's a bipartisan issue where national security is really the most important thing that we're focused on here. And what CMMC is designed to do is protect the data. So unlike another type of framework where you might be worried about the infrastructure or the controls or something else, this is really data centric and data focused. So you're not going to have a lot of overlap with other frameworks. So the controls might overlap a little bit, but how they're applied and where they're applied to will be different. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get down the slide deck and talk about the enclave aspect of CMMC. Let's see, who needs to comply? So anyone right now, so there's different phases of this. So I guess let's take a little step back and talk a little bit more about the journey, and not only now, but looking forward into the future. So who needs to comply currently today is anyone that does business with the DoD. Anyone in what's called the DIB, or the Defense Industrial Base, is who needs to comply right now today. Moving forward into the future, there'll be what's called the FAR rule. So the FAR will apply CMMC to all federal government agencies, not just the Department of Defense. Beyond that, CMMC is designed to be a global framework. So you already have other countries and other nations like Canada, Australia, people like that have their own version and their own flavor of CMMC. Some of them are the same, they're just lifting it and shifting it. Some of them, they're putting their own little spin on it. As an example, the Canadian version uses 171 Rev 3, which is slightly different than the United States version that uses Rev 2. So these are all nuances to keep in mind as you're thinking through your journey and where you are with CMMC. The big misconception here, I would say, is CMMC is active right now. So as I mentioned earlier, it dates all the way back to 2016, 2017. People have been self-reporting, doing self-assessments, calculating their SPUR score, their SPRS score since that time, and reporting it to the government. So if you're reporting a SPUR score, it already applies to you. You should already be CMMC compliant or thinking about becoming CMMC compliant as quickly as possible. You really don't want to get caught in a situation where you potentially lose funding. So there is a misconception about it's not really active yet because you're waiting on that final CFR that's supposed to be coming out. Right now, the effective date is looking like October 1st, but more to come on that. Let's go to the next. All right, so the business case for CMMC. So what does CMMC do? So as we just talked about a little bit, it really opens the door to DoD contracts and partnerships. So whether you're a prime or you're a sub to a prime, you're moving forward into the future, you're not going to be able to do business with the government, and you're not going to be able to do business with the Department of Defense without this certification. Let's see, and then helping to prevent and mitigate cybersecurity incidents. Yes, that's ultimately what it's designed to do. And again, it's more about the data, right? So this framework is designed to protect the data and ensure that it stays safe and out of the wrong hands.
Yeah, and Adam, I'd love to jump in too. Like when we think about business case and what doors CMMC opens, we go back to applicability as a whole. It's not just those that are the immediate contractors. It's from a flow down perspective, your subcontractors that have access to the CUI, right? Yep. Thinking about it's to your point and what you said earlier, it's very data centric. So like just because you're not in the DIB doesn't mean that these requirements don't impact you. It's the flow down of the fact that any like ancillary subcontractors that get that CUI or get the FCI as part of those engagements also need to show compliance there, where it kind of expands the scope a bit and gets organizations to think about that on a much more granular level.
Yep.
It's probably also worth mentioning that like the cost of an incident is way higher than just the response, right? There's the reputational impact, there's the impact to your clients and customers and everything like that. So the business case, at least from my view here, goes beyond just the compliance will help mitigate these incidents. There's a huge cost saving from not having had those incidents in the first place as well.
100%. And then like as far as just it being official in contract by virtue of the 42 CFR rule, right? It makes the line a bit like more solid in terms of those that will kind of get immediately blocked out of that kind of business where you have to have that CMMC certification or attestation if you are involved with that kind of data. It's not just about self-reporting the compliance. It's about showing that proof of it and making sure that there's a third-party audit review, especially for level 2s and 3s at least. So the ultimate publishment of it in contracts, it's just going to invite this implicit requirement to comply, which will then be the gate that you need to pass to unlock the future dollars for yourself.
There's also equivalency talks going on between various countries as well. So Canada and the US, for example, there's equivalency talks so that if you are CMMC compliant in the US, that means that you will also be able to do business with the Canadian defense industrial base. And there's other countries in talks with this as well. So there's the greater opportunity than just in the US as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point about the subs and the flow down. A classic example that I always like to use and talk about is just think of like a fighter pilot and the fighter pilot helmet as an example, right? You have the shell, you have the visor, you have the padding, you have the chin strap, you have the little snaps that clasp it together or clasp it on.
Yeah.
All of those components are likely coming from various sources. Exactly. And all of those flow downs, all of those subs are now also going to be required to have CMMC. So something as simple and basic as a helmet could have 10 organizations that are impacted and need CMMC requirements.
Yeah,
we do have a quick question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, the prio being like if we think about the intent, it's protecting national security at the end of the day and making sure that that's upheld from a DoD standpoint. And that's the risk, right? To keep in mind when we think about, okay, hey, CMMC compliance and adherence to those requirements, that's why it's so strict. The stakes are pretty darn high. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we did have one question from the audience that I wanted to answer too. Might be covering this later, but when is level 2 required? We are self-assessed with a SPURS score. So this is a good question. So generally speaking, anyone that's in level 2 will likely require a certification. It goes back to the data and the data classification. So CUI has several different classifications. So if you fall into a category of CUI that's called non-prioritized and non-specified. Again, this is going to be a very small number of people, but if you fall into that category where that's the only data set you have, then it's possible that you can get away with just a level 2 self-assessment. Anything beyond that, if you go into prioritized CUI, and certainly if you go into what's called specified CUI, so that's when you start getting into ITAR, export control, things like that, more sensitive data classifications, then it's absolutely going to be required. Yeah. But that information will be relayed to you from your contracting officer and or your prime. That will be clearly delineated for you. So hopefully that answers the question. Yeah, and I also want to add on to that, like if I believe it's the 32 CFR, they actually have a table of the DIB estimates that they went through as far as level 1, 2, 3. And if you look at the table, level 2 self-assessments, it's a really, really small percentage of entities that it might actually apply to, where if you know you have CUI, I would not expect or even bank that you might fall into that category. You just assume that you're going to be going through a third-party attestation, just because getting that like very low severity impact type of CUI and classifying as such, it's probably going to be very slim chances to do.
There's a lot of confusion I'm seeing out there as well, and a lot of the folks that I talk to who are thinking, "Hey, I just need to self-assess," are seeing that information but missing the fact that it's only a small percentage of the data that's actually classified as that. And so assuming, hey, we can just push this off, we'll just do our self-assessment and it's all good.
Yeah, and like if let's say you have FCI, okay, like that's a different story, right? FCI means level 1. The moment you start talking about CUI and then sensitive, it's like higher levels of CUI, the stakes get much higher, your requirements increase, and the need to have that third-party validation is kind of implicit relative to the risk.
It's kind of limiting to look at it that way as well. As you know, if you go through the audit, you get certified, then the doors are open for business. Versus, hey, if you are limiting yourself to just that one, your opportunities are much smaller.
100%.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Even with the self-assessment, so you still want to make sure that you have the in-house skill and expertise to actually be able to perform the self-assessment.
Exactly.
So it's critical that you're not just calculating a SPURS score and being like, yeah, I think we're good, giving yourself a perfect score and then submitting that to the government. If something were to happen, you're eligible or liable for a potential False Claims Act. And with the SPURS score submission, you as the entity, as the OSC or organization seeking certification, you have an authorized official that's signing off on that SPURS score submission. So not only could the company be held liable for a False Claims Act, but that individual could also be held liable as well. So it's important to make sure that you're doing these things in good faith, and it's not just a check the box exercise, and you actually have the people that can do it correctly.
And we are starting to see the government start to enforce that as well. Yes.
Yeah, they're doing a good job of making examples out of the people that are violating it, at least initially. So, absolutely. All right.
Awesome. Well, now we'll talk through just steps to approach. What I like to do is I like to start from a step 0, which is really, what you should do before you go buy a tool or engage someone to go do the CMMC thing that you're being asked to do or need to do to support your business. And it's starting from the roots, really, right? We've talked a lot about levels and data, but really understand your scope and the level that you're trying to complete. Start with the level. It's either going to be level 1, 2, or 3. It'll usually be for by contract, as we've just talked about, or by engagement with DoD contractors that have that requirement that are going to flow that requirement down to you. But then, like after that, you want to start to map data flows through which you might be getting the CUI and the FCI. And I view it pretty similar to how I look at other data-centric frameworks. Take PCI as an example, cardholder data environments. You have HIPAA for personal health information as a regulation. You have GDPR for PII of you and you get data subjects. Followed the data is usually what I tell customers, because CMMC is so data focused to begin with. If your data flows to any people, processes, systems, and locations, or even areas that could impact its security, it's probably in scope for you. Where it's inherently risk-based, as we've chatted through before, where the risk in the worst case is threat to the national security of the DoD. I'd also say that this is probably one of those things that slows orgs down a lot, because not having a proper scope set up to begin with can cause a lot of rework in terms of assessment of how compliant you truly are. But I know we'll get to more challenges further in this discussion as well. Once you set up scope, I think the next thing that I'd probably call out there is interpreting the control requirements and understand what truly needs to be done. That's also a huge undertaking, if I may say, especially for level 2 and 3 assessment levels, because there's so many to go do. And it's really understanding that control intent, why it was written, what you need to do, what was the point of the control that you're trying to implement, and that becomes a job in of itself. And that's where tools like Vanta come in, where you can get the CMMC framework requirements with the different levels to select from, just depending on what you're trying to do, map policy templates, automated tests, and evidence guidance to ultimately guide your implementation. Where Vanta does that heavy lifting from a, hey, like this requirement says X, this is the type of thing that you need to go perform and provide evidence of, all the while trying to automate your activities based on what we can connect to. And then just kind of going down the list here, you layer in that dedicated expert angle as well. Someone taking that guidance and running with it can be a really complex activity. Even if you have all the information to go do, it's still a behemoth, right? And you might just want that extra support to create the deliverables in the right way, make sure you're doing the things that you need to do. There are artifacts that aren't as straightforward. Things like the system security plan, as an example, the SSP, it's a pretty complex document. It's a behemoth. And doing that yourself, it's a very time intensive and complex activity, especially for those that aren't used to doing that sort of thing for other non-gov focused frameworks. That's where partners like Mirai play a huge role, where they'll work with you to ensure that you're approaching things for CMMC correctly. But with that, Sandy, could you talk us through how Mirai works with orgs interested in CMMC today?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing, we kind of start on step 3, doing the gap assessment, because it gives a really good idea. And, this is how, we start most projects is let's see where we are, figure out where we are, and then where we need to go. The real value there is, and what I see so many times is with organizations that haven't done CMMC before or are just getting started, for each of the 110 controls, that ends up being, half a day's worth of Googling to understand, hey, what do I actually need to do to meet this? What is the evidence actually need to look like?
And that's just the Googling.
And that's just the Googling. That's just trying to figure it out in the first place. And so Vanta does a great job of describing, hey, you need to do this. And then, where we come in is where the rubber meets the road. And okay, so let's take what that control needs to do, is asking you to do, and map that into your environment. Like here's what it, what that actually means. Here's what it looks like. Here's the easy way of doing that, right? Because there's definitely complex ways of doing it as well. And I see the question that Cameron has in the chat here about is Google Workspace Enterprise an option? And in most cases, yes. You don't need to. You can totally make your existing Google Space workspace CMMC compliant. Not always. It depends on how it's set up, but there's plenty of organizations that we've seen go through that. But we've also seen plenty of organizations go the more complex route and get additional tools and whatnot, where it's not necessarily strictly required. It can make it easier, but it can also increase costs or complexity there. And just going back to the scoping side of things, really want to hammer down on, like, you want your CUI to exist in as few places as possible and be touched by as few people as possible. And if you could get it on one system that is, and that's it, that just makes life easy. You limit that as much as possible, and you're limiting the scope of your audit. You're limiting the scope of the controls you need to put into place. You don't necessarily need to do all of your controls across your entire environment. To be compliant with CMMC, you have to make sure that the CUI is protected. So you can totally scope out a good portion of your environment, have separate, easier, less restrictive controls there, and that's really going to speed things up, reduce costs. And even when it comes down to training, like, you don't need your entire workforce to be trained on it if only this one portion here is going to handle this sort of data.
Yeah, that's a very great point. It's a great segue to like strategies to reduce the cost and underlying scope of the assessment, because that is the first recommendation. It's be really crisp on your scope and try to limit where it goes as much as possible, because the smaller the scope is, hopefully your complexity to implement CMMC's requirements across that scope are also pretty low too. One can hope. It's all relative to where the data goes, right? Who has access to it? And if we think about it, just at the macro layer, it's also implicitly what a lot of cybersecurity domains expect as well. Concept of least privilege. Yes, only those that should have access to environments that have GUI in it should be the ones that have specific privileges to do so. Where this is putting it in practice again from a data-centric perspective, where a lot of these requirements take from the root of what cybersecurity truly means. But then we should also think about checks and balances for each of those controls at a detailed level. Like if we think about things like encryption of your databases and checking for if they have the right encryption mechanisms in place, there's a lot of opportunity to automate checks like that, where actually going in or relying on another team member to go and review the encryption settings for your database and your cloud service provider, taking a screenshot of that. That's time and effort that you don't like necessarily need to do. If you have a platform that can do that instead, such as Vanta, where we can go in and connect to your tech stack and run tests based on your resources. And those tests are then pre-mapped to the requirements to show that, hey, you've completed this test, or hey, this test is failing. We've noticed XYZ databases that you need to go address. And by the way, is like this is impacting this control requirement under CMMC. Ultimately reducing that manual effort for yourself.
This is where I get really excited because, you know, if everything's running in the cloud, it's an event-driven architecture, and you don't like you know what the state is at all times. The possibilities for automating this and not having to have someone manually checking all of your servers for certain settings, not knowing if your configuration is actually standard, you know, not knowing if changes have had, like all of that stuff, you can automate all that away. And when you look at the past estimates of what it used to take to achieve even just SOC 2 compliance, the cost was, I think, about 10 times higher than it is these days, just by leveraging cloud, by leveraging tools like Vanta, automation scripts. It's really possible to do this with a small team now, whereas before it was really just the domain of large companies that could afford to do stuff like this. So it's interesting because this really opens up the market for smaller, more innovative companies to actually participate in these sort of business opportunities as well.
Absolutely. And it just evolves the concept of continuous monitoring too, right? Because once you have that automation in place, it's an ongoing monitoring. You're checking on an ongoing basis to make sure that things aren't going out of whack. And if they are going out of whack, then okay, you're getting notified to go in and address it and make sure you're following your change management procedures to go fix the thing that went out of compliance to begin with. So use those mechanisms to really help you target time in the places that you need to.
Manage by alert wherever possible, because if you don't need to have someone watching a screen, watching a dashboard to see if something's not in compliance, you're in a better spot.
100%. And Sandy, I'd actually also be curious, are there like big things that you come across in implementations based on your experience that you'd suggest maybe getting ahead on? I know we talked about the big aspect of SSPs. I know POEMs is a thing, but I'm curious, like from your perspective in implementations.
Yeah, aside from starting the documenting the hundreds of pages SSP, the big one that I see a lot of organizations getting caught up on is the logging side of things. Getting all of your logs collected, getting them all into one place, and actually making sure that all of the systems that need to be logged are actually being logged. It's a problem that existed before CMMC. It's probably going to exist for a long time, is making sure that all of your logging is accurate, is happening. That's going to be the big one. The other one is really down to the evidence. All of the evidence that you're collecting, it needs to be timestamped. It needs to actually follow really strict evidence procedures. And if you've gone through, say, an ISO or a SOC 2 before, they're very lenient in comparison. The auditors don't really look in super detail as to, hey, are all the timestamps on your logs coming from all your systems accurate? CMMC is a different beast in that regard. So making sure that that's all in place and making sure that those logs are immutable. So like, are you backing them up in a way that you can verify that they haven't been altered? Those are the probably one of the more technical, like challenging technical questions. That and staying on top of updates. There's so many security updates that come out all the time. Maintaining all of your applications and systems in a way that you're actually remediating these things on time it's a lot of effort, especially if you've got a big variety of systems. So having solid processes in place, if you've got a CI/CD pipeline where you can actually just push these things out, if you're doing infrastructure by code, it makes it a lot easier. If you're manually logging into 100 different systems to update them once a month when the new Windows patch lands, it's going to be a lot more work.
100%. I completely agreed. All right. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Adam to take us through challenges and how to avoid them. Adam, up to you.
Yeah. So you guys hit on a lot of different things there, right? There's a lot of different components to scoping and making sure that the data stays where it needs to stay and the logging and all of that. But so some of the big challenges that we see are, a lot of times people think they're ready and they're just not, right? So that's obviously a huge component. I think we've talked about several times, both of you have made mentions to the SSP and how large it is. If you send us a 70-page SSP, we're going to know you're not ready, right? I would say on average, the SSP is 200 pages or more. If you see one that's less than that, it's probably not robust enough.
The blank
so the
template
SSP
is that long.
And the other really big thing that we see a lot that I think causes confusion, we talked about the SSP, but there's also the customer responsibility matrix, the CRM, or the shared responsibility matrix, the SRM. The two terms are kind of used interchangeably. And then there's also the network diagram and the data flow diagrams. So those are all kind of foundational, fundamental aspects of CMMC that are required up front.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what we see is people will hand all of those over to us in a bundle and be like, hey, here you go, figure it out. Those three documents need to live and breathe on their own.
Yeah.
So you should be able to hand me any one of those individually, and I'll be able to tell you what your environment looks like, and what the scope is, and how the pieces interconnect. Yeah. It shouldn't be a situation where you're handing me all three or four in a lump and being like, all right, figure out how they go together, right? Yeah. So that's a big point of confusion and contention, I would say, in the process. And then there's other aspects to it as well, right? So one of the other big things that we see a lot is where people they skip over some of the foundational aspects, where there's misconceptions with tools and things like that maybe this tool says it covers 100 controls.
Yeah.
And then there's only 10 left. Well, there's a huge misconception on what those 10 mean, and how long it's going to take you to comply with those 10. So CMMC is a really massive overarching framework. I think somebody else mentioned it a couple slides ago about the 110 controls.
Yeah.
Well, there's 110 controls, yes, but there's 320 requirement statements.
Yeah. Yeah. The assessment.
We're not assessing you to those 110 controls. We're assessing you on those 320 requirement statements.
100%. Yeah.
So that's also a gigantic leap that oftentimes people just don't consider. It's just not something they think about. So there's just a lot of moving parts. And the other thing, and this kind of ties into Cameron's question, so I'll answer this kind of in conjunction with this as well. The other thing we're seeing a lot are bad cage codes. So we've had clients that would come to us, maybe they don't even have a cage code. They don't even know they need one, right? Yeah. Or the cage code is old, it's expired, the cage codes aren't nested correctly. So you have to really make sure that your cage codes are accurate and in order before you start the assessment. We as the assessor oftentimes won't know that That's really you and your responsibility as the client. Now, where it becomes a problem is upon submission into EMAS. So when we submit it to EMAS, then EMAS is going to kick it back and say, hey, we can't issue anything with this. This is a bad code.
Yeah.
So that's something to really keep in mind up front. And then Cameron's question here is, what if there is no contract? For example, solicitations on sam.gov are often designated CUI. And yes, the same thing applies there, and the same thing goes for that. So just last week, there was a solicitation out on sam.gov from the Army, and there was a lot of information in there about CMMC. It went over the CMMC program, went over the effective date. It called out specifically October 1st, and then it mentioned that CMMC certification is required to even participate in this solicitation. So yeah, the solicitations on sam.gov and the contracts are kind of one and the same. As CMMC evolves, you'll see the same type of information in the solicitations as you would expect to see in the contracts as well.
Absolutely.
Right, and then future proofing.
All right. So one of the big things that we see with as going quickly back to the common challenges is organizations passing their audit and then kind of falling off the compliance cliff. So it's been a marathon to get there. It's been a ton of work. You just got your audit done. Everyone's ready to celebrate. And all of the, some of the processes and whatnot that were put in place are not being followed now. And so the big risk here, and this is when we talk about future proofing this, is you want to make sure that when you're designing your controls, you're designing your technologies and everything, you're setting up your program, that you're thinking about how is this actually going to be maintained? How are we going to make sure that we're, because hey, we only have to be audited once every 3 years. You still have to submit your SPRS score. And going back to what Adam was saying is you want someone who is able and willing to stand behind whatever that score is when they're submitting it. So how do you think about setting up your program so that it can continue to be maintained and isn't going to fall off that cliff? It's important to think about the budgeting side of things. It's going to continue to there's going to continue to need to be investment as time goes on. You need to make sure that you've got that scheduled, that you've got that booked aside so that you have your pen test every year, that there's various software that you need to purchase, that you need to have budgeted in. And it's important as well to have everyone that is in the company here buying in, because you need everyone to understand how important it is for the business, for sustaining the entire program, and everyone needs to be on board. And that's right from a leadership on down. One of the big areas that we see organizations fail with this is CMMC will get kind of pushed down to a team, say, hey, we need you to make us CMMC compliant, and it's an uphill battle trying to get the rest of the organization to buy in. It's if you don't have everyone rowing in the same direction, it's going to be a big challenge. And this is, going back to the automation side of things, this is where automation really comes in handy. Vanta, with the way that they've set up CMMC in the platform, is an amazing workflow management tool. Everything else aside, because you can set up all of your recurring tasks, all of your monthly checks, your quarterly checks, your annual checks, all of those things will be in there, and you can have tasks for them, and you can make sure that they're getting done. You set up your automation so that you don't have to gather evidence manually as much as possible. Set up automation so that when an issue is discovered, a task is automatically raised in your task management system, and then when it's closed, it's automatically marked down. And making sure that you keep that whole chain of actions that are going through here. That's the evidence that's going to be necessary the next time you go into your audit, or if there's ever an incident and your environment is under investigation. That's the information that is going to be necessary to show that all of your processes are in place, that you're working, that you're following them, and that you are in fact CMMC compliant, even though even after the date of that assessment. Because that assessment really, it looks at the current state when they did the assessment. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are still CMMC compliant a year out. So you need to put all this in place to make sure that you stay that way.
100%. And I want to echo the leadership buy-in perspective. We think about even frameworks as a whole, right? For CMMC aside, when you go try to embody cybersecurity in your organization at large, having that leadership buy-in and support is 100% necessary for that to be effective across the board. So especially when we think about these really high prio initiatives that also are pretty complex in nature, it's very important for you to have strategic conversations on why we're doing what we're doing, making sure that your organization at large understands the severity of specific activities they may or may not be involved with, and promote the culture of cybersecurity at large.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you're talking about future proofing too, Sandy, you mentioned that it's a triennial assessment, which is true. So that's another thing to keep in mind from a business operations and organizational standpoint, right? So just as an example, say you want to get CMMC certified and you've made the decision, hey, I'm not going to print anything. But then in 6 months, you're like, oh, wait, I can't operate like this. I actually have to print this. Well, what does that do? That triggers a recertification because now you've changed your scope. Now you've changed your environment. Now you have to be recertified. Similarly, hey, I only have one location today, but in the next 2 years, I think I'm going to open up another location. So again, that's going to change your scope. That's going to trigger a recertification before your triennial period expires. So as an organization, you really need to think ahead. Hey, what does this 3 years look like? Where am I going? And what do I need to do to get there? And can I live with this decision that I'm making today for the next 2.5 years or 3 years?
Yeah. And that plays really well into the conversation around how do you minimize your scope as much as possible, right? So the printing example is a great one. Well, if you need to print for the rest of your business, if it's possible to get the CMMC side of things where you don't print, great. But otherwise, if you need to make those changes, like Adam said, that's it's a huge effort, and it can't be done quickly because and Adam, you can probably comment on this best, but what's the lead time on scheduling an audit right now? There's a bit of a land rush because everyone wants one, everyone needs one.
Yeah, the rush is huge, right? I would say you're looking at a minimum 3 to 6 months trying to get scheduled, just depending on the assessor.
Just scheduled.
I don't remember, Sandy, if it was you that mentioned earlier the table that the DoD released with the thousands. I mean, they're estimating roughly 80,000 organizations are going to need some level of CMMC support. My feeling is they don't really have a good sense of that, and it's really more than that. And that's just in the DoD. When you expand it out across all federal agencies or even internationally and start talking about Canada and other places, I would estimate at least 250,000 organizations are going to need some level of CMMC support, whether that's a full-blown assessment or not, to be determined. But with that being said, there's only about 70 C3PAOs right now in the marketplace. So you divide 250,000 by 70, you can see the huge lead time, the huge volume, the huge bandwidth constraints that there are going to be. So that's really why it's so important to take this seriously and get out ahead of it as much as you can.
Yeah, we're also seeing other countries hoping to leverage the C3PAOs. So Canada, for example, is hoping to leverage the existing C3PAOs to audit their version of CMMC. So that's only going to add to it.
Yep.
All right. So I think on to the next one here. There we go. Perfect.
We'll hand it to Ro.
What, it's me again.
There it is.
That's me. Well, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground today, from frameworks and timelines to tools and cultural buy-in. And before we move into questions, I wanted to leave you with three key takeaways from our discussion today. Start with scope and clarity. Well, let me read it exactly here. Know when to do it yourself versus get help. Balance internal efforts with the right tools and expert support to move faster. Avoid common roadblocks. Learn where teams get their get stuck. I'm sorry. Learn where teams get stuck and how to stay audit ready year round. And last but not least, build for long-term resilience. CMMC is more than a checklist. It's a foundation for stronger security. Is there anything else that you guys, Adam, Faisal, or Sandy, would like to add to any of these key takeaways before we hop onto the questions that we have pending?
I'd say that, and this might directly answer Garrett's question by saying this too, it's get started as early as possible. That October 1st date is a potential estimate of when it might come in force and contract. But as we chatted through earlier, CMMC has been around, the requirements have been around, organization should have been doing it to begin with. It's just about what the October 1st estimate is about, when it'll start appearing directly in contracts and solicitations that you get. So yes, the expectation is that you're doing what you say you're doing if you said you were doing it to begin with. It just depends on who you are and where you are in that process. But I'd say get started early, understand your scope, really get crisp on it, and be very clear about why something isn't in scope. Because when you get to assessment land and you say something's not out of scope, and maybe if it in any way, shape, or form is, that becomes a really tough conversation at that point in time. So really think of it from an auditor perspective, right? It's like, hey, how could an auditor ask me this question from a compliance angle, where you can use tools like Vanta, use partners like Mirai to get ahead of that curve and have that expertise up front.
Yeah.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
add in,
Very insightful. Oh, go ahead, sir.
I'll just add in, automate as much as possible. The more you automate, the easier it'll be, and the less work you have to do to maintain everything.
Yeah, and I would just say to reiterate, really know your skill level, know the size, know the maturity, know the skill level of your in-house personnel, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Right? If you can't do it or you don't feel comfortable with some aspect of it, there's lots of organizations that are able to help. Like Mirai and Vanta and others. So certainly know yourself, I would say. So going back to that self-assessment comment from earlier in the webinar, make sure you have that expertise that you need to be comfortable and make the right decisions there. And
just know that you're not alone if you don't know that requirement. If it seems overwhelming, it's because it probably is. It's complicated, and that's why we're there to help.
For sure.
Okay, so let's hop in. We have two questions that we have unanswered, and I want to make sure we touch base with Cameron. So the first question that we haven't yet touched on for him, he explains that he works for a SaaS platform. Oh, you already want? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at this. So in most cases, if an organization that is CMMC compliant wants to store their CUI data on a SaaS platform, that SaaS platform needs to be FedRAMP certified. Which is probably not the answer that you were hoping for, because that is, we've been talking about CMMC. FedRAMP is way more work. The SSP template for FedRAMP Moderate is 327 pages blank. And so you can just imagine the amount of work that's required there. But that is the case in order to be able to store that CUI data for customers.
Plus one, the way to view it in the CMMC terms is you're technically an ESP that stores QE, right? External service provider. And in those cases, if you were an external ESP that wasn't interacting with QE and you didn't have it, but you are maybe managing the security of it, you might be classified as a security protection asset. Or if you're like an ESP that isn't involved with QE, but like maybe like in some indirect way or in that vicinity of it, there's potential for contractor risk management assets. Like there are various different tiers to thinking about types of assets, QE, SPAs, CRMAs. I was trying to do the acronym there, but it's important to take a step back and go like, what are you actually doing with it? But if you're straight up storing QE as a SaaS platform, FedRAMP authorization is probably on your horizon there.
Yeah, and I would just say, just to echo that, I mean, they're both 100% correct, but CMMC does leave you a little wiggle room where you only have to prove FedRAMP equivalency. You don't actually have to be FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP certified.
That's right.
But I will say the caveat to that is proving equivalency is often harder than just getting certified or authorized. So if you need to go down that path, I would say just go ahead and bite the bullet and embrace FedRAMP and move from there.
Yeah, if you're going to do all those requirements anyway, then you might as well go through the authorization flow and try to push your business that direction. But very, very valid point, Adam. I forget the specific addenda, but it was FedRAMP moderate, authorized, or equivalent. And then there's this whole explanation around equivalency assessment and what that means and how the bar is technically a lot higher for those assessments.
Yeah, for some reason, FedRAMP moderate equivalent is stricter than FedRAMP moderate.
Well, we have 2 more questions, and we're 5 minutes before the top of the hour. So Cameron also asked a very specific question. If our queue is limited to Gmail and Google Drive and Google Workspace is configured correctly, do we inherit their CMMC certification, assuming all other controls in Vanta we are meeting and thus QE does not leave either of those apps?
Short answer is no. There is no inheritance within the CMMC ecosystem. So if you're thinking of inheritance, like when I read this question, I'm thinking high trust. Like high trust, you can inherit from AWS or Azure, or, whoever. There is no inheritance. Now, those organizations, so in this case, in your example, Google Workspace should have the responsibility matrix. And you can leverage the responsibility matrix within your own documentation. So again, keeping in mind what I talked about earlier, that those documents should live and breathe on their own. Yeah. So you should be referencing what Google is doing for you within your own SSP. But can you, quote, inherit from them and claim level 2 certification because of them? No. That doesn't exist.
It's third-party risk management at the end of the day, right? They're going to get QE, technically flow down applies, and just depending on what they are, if they're a cloud service offering or not, whoever the organization is, it's starting to think about, okay, well, if you're not cloud service offering, CMMC is likely on your horizon. If you're a cloud service offering, as we just chatted through, FedRAMP moderate equivalency or an actual authorization is probably about like your net requirement there.
The shared responsibility matrix will outline what controls or what that you can inherit from these from G Drive or Gmail, but it's only their portion of it.
They also, I know, have Google also offers a specific cloud service for CMMC that has a specific subset of qualifications for you to. Right. They also have one for a FedRAMP as well to help companies that want to leverage that cloud environment. Yeah. But like you guys said, that's a separate instance outside of your Google Workspace. So you still would have to have a different place to store stuff.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump onto to David's question here, which is it's tricky to answer what the best definition of CUI is because it's going to be defined in the contracts.
Exactly.
So you have to be told that this is CUI. So and that's where the flow down requirements come from. So if your customers are telling you that they are putting CUI in your environment, well, they should know better. That's on them. But that's really the only way to know for certain, unless contractually the data has been identified.
Yeah, plus 100. It's the definition. Even if you look at like online forums, especially like NIST, for example, the definition can be pretty broad in terms of what actually constitutes a CUI and versus FCI. You can get crisp into the like the different categories of CUI as an example, and work your way backwards from there, and kind of do yourself. But what is actually CUI? It's probably best for you to engage your prospect or customer or the contract that's being flowed down to you and go from there.
Yeah, I would suggest visiting the NARA registry as well. So they're the ones that define the classifications of CUI, or really all government data, but CUI is included in there. That'll be the most definitive source, I would say, for the definition and the different types and the different categories. And the DoD also has a really good CUI marking training as well. So it kind of walks you through how you should market, when you should market, those types of things. So I would suggest those two as a good resource.
Yeah.
We have another question from David. He's asking.
Yeah, I think
okay.
that's a good way of looking at it. There is, it's really going to depend on them. So they would have to look at their contracts to really clarify it for you.
Yep.
Okay, well, we're at almost the 2 o'clock mark. So if there's no other questions, then we can start wrapping the webinar up. Thank you so much for all of you who joined us and participated in this amazing and insightful webinar. If there's at any point any questions that we didn't cover but you still have, feel free to reach out to either of us. We have the contact information here for Inside Assurance. Please feel free to email sales@Inside Assurance. If you want to reach out to Mirai, please email them at sales@miraisecurity.com. And if you want to reach out to Vanta for assistance on the GRC platforms, you can email them at sales@vanta.com. We hope you enjoyed the webinar as much as we did, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.